Should the group from Atlanta in season 1 of The Walking Dead have stayed at the CDC when Jenner gave them the chance to opt out? Or was the correct decision actually leaving, as most of them did? Welcome back to Lost in Games Unscripted, the series where I talk about whatever happens to come into mind at any given time. And today, that is actually a response to a question that I received, or kind of a comment that I got on a video a couple of weeks ago. It was really intriguing, and it got me thinking about this topic in particular. That comment was from Jason Jefferson 4389, and they said, "I would like to see a conversation between blowing up the CDC or continuing to live in the world. I think that's a big dilemma." And you're right, that is a huge dilemma for a plethora of reasons. So today we're going to dig into whether or not they should have stayed, or if they were right to actually leave the CDC in the long run. Now, this conversation doesn't have a simple solution because the answer is going to differ a lot between individual people. As we see in the show, Jacqui decides that she wants to stay at the CDC. And a lot of that is driven by what she has seen, especially recently. So they just had to deal with Jim dying. He got bit and they had to leave him on the side of the road. I get the feeling that her and Jim were kind of close. They seemed to be good friends, at least at a minimum. But also they lost a lot of people at the camp just a couple of days prior. So they had a zombie attack when they were least expecting it. And they lost 13 unnamed people, as well as Ed Peltier, I think that's how you say his last name, and then Amy, Andrea's sister. And so they went through all kinds of just horrific stuff. And for somebody like Jacqui, that got her thinking that maybe I don't want to be in a world where I could be ripped apart at any moment. You know, maybe it's inevitable that we're just all going to wind up that way, or we're going to wind up in a really bad situation. We find out later that Dr. Jenner had told Rick about the fact that they were all infected. And when they were trying to escape, and Rick was like, "Well, thank you. I'm grateful for you to give us this opportunity." And Jenner's response was, "The day will come when you won't be."
Get out of here, Sophia.
There's your chance. Take it.
Grateful.
The day will come when you won't be.
Now, as we know, that later becomes a title for the episode where Negan is introduced, because that is the day that it's like everything seems to have just completely fallen apart. You know, a lot of bad stuff happens between those moments that kind of makes people question things. Lori questions after Carl is shot whether or not they just should have stayed at the CDC. And Andrea wanted to stay at the CDC. She only left because of Dale, and there's a question about whether or not that was on Dale, or how much of that, because if you look at it, Dale said, "Well, I just lost Amy. We lost all of these other people. I don't want to keep going on living because I've seen you guys as like surrogate daughters. That's the reason I've had to go on. And if you're going to stay here, I've got nothing else to live for." And that forces Amy's hand because she doesn't want to see Dale die. So she decides, "Well, I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave with you. I guess I'll try to keep on living." Right. So there's a variety of different reasons. But the big question that we usually focus on here on the channel is about the morality of it. What would be the morally right thing to do when it comes to the CDC? Is there a moral justification for staying behind and just letting the explosion take you out and opting out, as Dr. Jenner calls it? Or is there a moral justification to leave over staying behind? Now, a lot of that goes back to your moral system, where your morals come from a deontological standpoint, which a lot of people ascribe to deontology, at least somewhat, because it is a duty-based. It is typically, a lot of times they're handed down moral obligations. Deontology is for a lot of religions are deontological, where you have a God has handed down the moral rights and wrongs and what you can and can't do. And a lot of religions, a lot of deontological ways of doing things is focused on duty-based, and a lot of religions will say dying, taking yourself out is not okay. There are a lot of religions that will say that if you end your own life, if you opt out, then you will wind up going to hell or purgatory or some kind of, or maybe just non-existence instead of going to be with the God. Whatever your version of like the worst possible scenario is, taking yourself out sends you there. So from a deontological standpoint, the argument could very easily be made that, well, you shouldn't. You need to try to keep moving on. That is your duty to just continue trying to live regardless of what happens or whatever circumstance you're in. Now, there could be some exceptions listed there, but for the most part, it's going to be like, yeah, you can't stick around here. It gets interesting when you talk about utilitarianism, though, because utilitarianism is focused on the overall well-being of the group. And it could be argued that your presence in the group is a positive thing. Maybe you have some expertise, maybe you have an ability that other people don't within the group that could help the survival and help the group overall. Perhaps Jacqui being there would have helped them out when they got to the farm, right? Maybe her presence would have done something to change the course of events with Shane. Maybe she would have had some influence on Rick over time that would have made him leave Randall instead of bringing him back. Who knows where that could have gone. She was a city planner, right? She worked in the city zoning and planning office before the apocalypse, so she had some planning expertise. She could have set the farm up where they could have had, better defenses or something like that. So maybe you have something that could help the group out, in which case the morally right thing to do would be to continue moving on, continue on and not opt out. However, there's a double-edged sword there, because you could also harm the group unintentionally. So we see this a little bit with Andrea with her mindset. After she leaves the CDC, she feels this animosity towards Dale. She kind of isn't all in it. She doesn't really want to be with the group anymore. She kind of wants to go off and do her own thing. And so that kind of mindset ultimately could wind up costing people, because what happens is you'll have this subconscious part of your brain that will kind of act without you even realizing it to self-sabotage, right? So not saying that Andrea necessarily does this in any one particular circumstance, but it could be a situation where maybe her heart's not really in it when they're out searching for Sophia, right? Maybe she was walking along and she heard a snapping twig or something like that and just kind of brushed it off and said, oh, it's not even worth it. I don't even care anymore, right? And maybe that was Sophia trying to hide, and if she just would have looked, she could have found her. But that would have been a subconscious thing, not necessarily Andrea saying, I don't care about Sophia, but Andrea saying the whole thing is pointless. Why do we even bother? She's not putting her whole self into it, right? So she ignores a sound. That could be a possible thing that would happen. And that could wind up costing people their lives as well. If you are not all in it, if you're not fully wanting to survive, if you have had the situation where you could have opted out of the CDC, but somebody kind of forced your hand and you had to leave, you could have a situation where you don't want to be there, you aren't really paying attention to guard duty, and zombies walk up and eat people on your watch because you weren't really paying attention, because you didn't care, you weren't all in it, right? So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Realistically, if you don't want to be there, if you truly are in a situation where zombies are eating everybody, you've lost a bunch of people, you have to worry about raiders as well as zombies in this world. It's just this hostile world and you really don't want to be there. Morally speaking, the best option would be to stay at the CDC and opt out with Jenner. And that's what Jacqui did. Jacqui was like, I just can't do this anymore. She might not have been a benefit to the group in the long run. She might have actually been even worse than Andrea. She might have said, well, I guess I'll try and keep going on, even though I really don't want to. And then who knows what could have happened later on. Things could have gotten much, much worse. So that's where, for me, the utilitarian argument is a little bit more interesting, because there's just so much more there. And everybody has their personal views and their personal feelings. Everybody would handle things differently. I would like to think of that situation, I'm typically a survivor. I typically try to push really hard. I don't give up. I keep pushing even when things don't work out for me. And that can be a detriment sometimes, but it's also a positive. So I'd like to think that I'm the kind of person that would say, no, let me have the opportunity. I think I would be like Rick, where don't lock me in here. Don't make me get blown up. Let me go out and at least have the chance to survive, because who knows what's going to happen. I also have a little bit of an optimistic view of things. I look at shows like The Walking Dead and I think, okay, well, they could just rebuild society. I see a positive future, much like what they see eventually with Alexandria, and then the kind of with the Commonwealth, where you can kind of rebuild things. You can kind of focus on, maybe you don't want to bring back every aspect of modern society, but maybe you rebuild things to where you have food, you have shelter, you have security once more, right? I see that positive future, and I would try to be striving to get there. We know that it doesn't work out great for the group in the long run, or in the short term at least. The next couple of years after the CDC, there's a lot of times where Rick and Lori first, and then Rick eventually starts to kind of doubt things. Carl gets shot. Lori winds up dying in childbirth. You know, Shane, Rick's best friend and brother, almost, you know, goes against him, and then he has to kill him. So there's all of these bad things. The farm falls. Dale winds up dying. Herschel winds up dying eventually. Like, there's just all of these things, negative things that keep happening, at least until they reach Alexandria, and then of course things kind of spiral from there with Negan and everything. But like, there are all of these things that Rick, if I feel like he would look back on the CDC at points and be like, damn, we should just stay at the CDC, you know, because eventually his family falls apart. And I know I haven't really watched the Rick and Michonne spinoff, right? So I don't know because that just got too much for me. But like, Rick, eventually his whole family falls apart. He is taken away by it's not the Commonwealth. I don't know the name of the group that he's taken away by, but he's gone. Carl dies. Judith is all that's left, really. You know, by the time we get to the later seasons, there are very few people. I think Judith might be the only one, and Maggie, but Maggie was more season 2. Judith was technically there in season 1, right? Everybody else just like dies in horrific ways over the course of the series. I don't think there's anybody that just like has a heart attack, dies of natural causes, right? So Rick has to think multiple occasions, damn, should we have just stayed at the CDC? Should we have just opted out? Maybe that was the better choice. What would you choose if you were at the CDC? If you were sitting there and the zombie apocalypse had been going on, you were with the Atlanta group, and you had the option to either opt out with Jenner and stay, or try your hand out in the zombie world, what would you do? And how much thought would you give to that? They don't have a ton of time to think. And that's the flip side of that. I think that Jenner probably should have told them right away. You know, he said, well, once the door closes, it doesn't open again. That's so cryptic, man. He should have been like, hey, fuel reserves are running low. Everything's shutting down, and the building's going to blow up in a couple of days. You know, let's really think about this. Because they could have had more time. And they could have, the grenade helped them get out, but they could have found other ways to maybe escape if they had more than 3 minutes that they had to get out. You know, they found out within a 15-20 minute period that like, hey, the building's going to explode. Maybe he should have given them more time and discussed that. I think Jenner was trying to make the decision for all of them, and that is just wrong. You shouldn't make the decision for other people. I think I want to make sure I got all of the notes that I've got here. But yeah, so that's my thoughts on what should have happened at the CDC. I want to know your thoughts. Like I said, what would you do if you were at the CDC? What do you think they should have done? Do you think, and hindsight's 2020, but even with all of the stuff that happened afterwards, do you still think it was the right move for Rick and the group to leave? Do you think that Jacqui being the only one to stay behind, do you think that everybody else was right to leave? Do you think that Jacqui should have left? You know, even with everything that was going to happen, do you think that that would have been the right move? Let me know down in the comments below. I've had a quick channel update with everything that's been going on. So the last few weeks I've been kind of busy. I've had a lot of stuff going on. I've been trying to get one video out a week. I'm getting a new schedule down. I'm starting to finally get used to some changes in my life and that kind of thing. And so that's going to mean one video a week like this every week. But I'm also doing I've got another channel that I've started up because I am a writer. I have written 3 books. I love writing fiction and scary stories, especially. I love writing horror kind of stuff. And a few years ago, I had written an entire book called Legends and Tales, Creepy and Fun Stories to Tell Around the Campfire. And it is a compilation of a bunch of different short horror stories that I wrote. I've got a few more stories that I've written that I'm working on trying to get a second book out. But in the meantime, what I'm doing is I have started a new channel where I am reading those stories and sharing them out on YouTube. Right now, there's only one video up on there. I'm going to be releasing one video a week is the plan right now. I've got a whole backlog of stories to read. And then eventually going into the fall, I'm going to be having some new ones take place as well. So that's all part of my new schedule, trying to get things out because at my heart, I'm a creative person. I need to have that creative outlet. And as fun as this channel is and the conversations, the philosophy and ethics series, the friend or foe series, those are fun to me, but I need a creative outlet. And if I have to choose between a creative outlet and doing the philosophy and ethics, that writing the scripts for those take a lot of time and effort and energy that I just don't have right now. So this is what I have for this channel. That channel is called Stories from the Asylum. I'll link it down in the description below so you guys can go check it out. It's kind of a fun little just spooky story kind of thing. So if you enjoy that kind of thing, you can go check that channel out. It's not very big right now. I just started it. So, but that's really all I have for this video. You can join the Patreon, the channel memberships if you would like to help support the channel, help me continue doing this into the future. You know, I've got a lot of big plans, a lot of things I'd like to do. A lot of that's going to depend on the time I have available. So if you're able to help support the channel, that goes a long way and it helps me out a ton. So that's all I've got for this one. I want to thank you all for watching. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.